It's not just about money.
I would be happy if we have any external government, because it would mean that we have just a government.
You better not mess with Serhii Fursa. Hello world, it's still Kyiv, not Kiev, your source for the updates from Ukraine. My name is Tatiana Haiduk. Here's my friend and colleague Polina Boychuk, and we are very pleased you joined us today because we have something really very special to show you. Yeah, today we are testing a very unusual format for us, and we hope that it will be a success. In our previous episodes, we emphasized a lot on the importance of the cooperation between the IMF and Ukraine.
The IMF is an opportunity.
Cooperation with the IMF is of great significance for Ukraine.
Ukraine had reached a tentative agreement with the IMF.
And now we have a great news because the cooperation will continue. Yeah, and today we'll spend some more time on the IMF questions and all the questions around IMF, and we'll try to sort out if this is external governance or if this is very good for Ukraine. And to do that perfectly well, we invited a brilliant expert and a very good friend of us, Mr. Serhii Fursa.
Hello everybody, hello girls. And
Let me briefly introduce you.
Yes,
Let me do this myself. So, okay, Serhii is investment banker, an analyst of Dragon Capital, and a columnist, the one who we used to call an opinion leader. Am I right?
You're right, but I'm not analyst in Dragon Capital. Mostly fixed income sales. I used to be analyst before Dragon Capital, and for the last 9 years I'm fixed income sales. It's important because real analysts from Dragon Capital always have jealous when somebody else calls analyst, because only research, like official research, could represent the name of the company.
I was trying to Google you because I was not acquainted with you yesterday, and first of all I'd like to thank you very much that you agreed to participate, and I'm very happy to meet you in person finally. And when I Googled your name, I found that you are a blogger, an analyst, but we found out that you're not.
I'm not a blogger, I'm not an analyst.
Anyway, an opinion leader. And I've also found that you are often called Sorosyan. So, my question is, can you please explain who are Sorosята to our external foreign audience, and what relationship do you have with the people who are called Sorosята?
There is some group of people who connected with some oligarchs and pro-Russian parties who try to say that Ukraine doesn't need to integrate to Western society. In Ukraine, oligarchs are establishment, and these people, as a part of establishment, they become quite influential because they have TV channels, most popular TV channels, they have a lot of money, and they produce all these stories against Western society, values. They fight with values, but you can't fight with values. So you fight with Soros itself. Soros is just an old guy who always 90, who lives in New York, and he doesn't give any idea what happens in Ukraine now, mostly because it's too far from him. But if he would Google himself in Ukrainian, in Russian, he will find out he's the most influential person in Ukraine. So the audience of this brand, this Sorosята brand, that should scare somebody, is half of this. On one hand, it's Ukrainian society, on the other hand, it's president itself.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that Zelensky is a big fan of the conspiracy theories, so I really believe that he might.
He might, because every taxi driver is a believer in conspiracy theory, and mindset of President Zelensky is very close to taxi driver's mindset.
So, but who are these people, like, namely? Can we say who are kind of anti-Soros coalition of Western external governance here?
There is two big groups. One very big group is pro-Russians. It's a pro-Russian parties, pro-Russian channels, pro-Russian influentials.
Like oppositional bloc?
Opposition bloc, Medvedchuk mainly. Medvedchuk and his TV channel, his network itself. And people who was somehow connected with government of Yanukovych. On the other hand, it's Kolomoisky and his buddies inside ruling party, because he was quite influential in forming ruling party, and his TV channel now 1+1 is like a main topic anti-Western propaganda now. Kolomoisky now under investigation of big jury. So if he will just left slightly Ukrainian border, FBI will catch him and bring to US. So he need to break any relations with Western world itself, yes, because for him it's question of his life. because if he would be catched by FBI, he would spend all his life forever in some US jail, and he understands it. So he trying to break Ukrainian and Western cooperation, and he pushes all these Russian propaganda stories inside Ukraine. And because his TV channel is very good in propaganda itself, they're very professional.
And it's a big machine with a
Yeah,
long
propaganda
history.
machine.
Of course. So it's good that we started to talk about the IMF in this context, because all of these conspiracy theories is of course very funny and cool. But now when we face the narrative that the IMF is the evil itself, and this narrative is pictured to the most of Ukrainians as the dominative one, it scares me much. So now we should explain to people of Ukraine, and you do this very well, why the IMF isn't that bad as most of people think of it is.
It's not about money, it's about reforms. Because Ukraine should follow its Western neighbors, yes, all these countries of the Warsaw Bloc who made all reforms in the early 90s and now became a part of European Union. Ukraine can't do all these reforms like IMF recommended for ages, for 30 years, because people don't have political will, because first of all, the stuff that recommended by IMF are not popular. You know what happens with Poland. All these Polish guys who made brilliant reforms in the early 90s, they are hated in the country. We need money, we need to finance budget deficit, but nobody is giving us money without IMF support because they do not trust us.
Yeah, because the presence of IMF in the country, the presence itself is the factor of comfort for a foreign investor to come.
Do not give any trust to Ukraine, to Ukrainian authorities. We did a lot of reforms for the last 5 years, but it all was done under this Western push. Yes, I can't say that it's external government. I would be happy if we have any external governments because it would mean that we have just a governance. But now we have no governance, and no, sorry about that, but no external governance.
In that context, I wanted to ask, because they often say in the media platforms, and often the president says that the IMF requires the reforms to be implemented in Ukraine. But I think that this is the main controversy, because I suppose that Ukrainians are who need these reforms to be done, because that's Ukrainians who need quality education, that's Ukrainians who need quality medical institution, but they revert it vice versa, and they show it in the way that is the IMF that requires us to do those reforms.
Yes, but Ukrainians struggle from not having the reforms, but they do not understand that they need these reforms, because you need to be a professional in some field to understand what you need. Yes, it is main problems now of Ukrainian authorities, because they do not understand. They do not understand that institution is important. They want to build roads and think that the structure changes, but it's not real structural changes. So average Ukrainian, like Ukrainian president now is like average Ukrainian. Yeah?
Taxi driver.
Yeah, taxi driver, just usual taxi driver, doesn't understand what you need to be done to change situation. Ukrainian civil society is very weak, to be honest. Yes, there is no enough power for Ukrainian civil society to push authorities to do some changes. So authorities looking on ratings do not show you any reforms. No. Give us money and do not ask us to pay taxes, what Ukrainians ask from authorities. So only one real power that could push you to do reforms is IMF.
So let's talk about the new program of the IMF for Ukraine. So previously we were talking about 3 years EFF, extended financing facilities. Right, exactly. So as we know now, we're talking about 18 months long standby program. So what is the difference, I mean, in the concept of cooperation? Is this somehow an evidence that the IMF does not trust the Ukrainian government? That's the reason for shorter program, or what?
No, I don't think. I think it's evidence of the critical situation of the world and the corona crisis, etc. No, there is no trust, really. But it's not an evidence of it. And now the standby, just do not break everything you've done for the last 5 years. It's the main idea of this program. And we try to pass to the next level of reforms you already implemented, but in very moderate way, because I think IMF do understand that now it's not a time for Ukrainian government to implement reforms, really, and because of the corona crisis and because of absence of political will.
The memorandum and all this program signed between Ukraine and the IMF states clearly all the terms of cooperation, and if I'm not mistaken, all the previous programs can be put in a line due to the fact that Ukraine has never fully fulfilled all the requirements that the IMF posted. So what is your forecast for this program? Will Ukraine cope with all the assignments?
I do not believe in it, really, because again, now we really need the money, really need the money. That's why this anti-Kolomoisky law was passed, that's why land reform was passed in some way. It was very dodgy again, but it was passed. I do not believe that Ukraine could finish any program without sabotage now.
And what reforms are the most problematic, and what are the stakeholders who are interested in their failure?
Okay, I think all reforms now under attack. First and the most important reform is independence of national bank, and this reform was very successful. And we see now a situation with huge world crisis, recession, and stable Ukrainian national currency. It's unbelievable for Ukrainians, because you always used, if you have a crisis, you have a devaluation. Now you have no devaluation, and it's one of the results of banking system reform. But there is Kolomoisky interest, and Kolomoisky's interest is to take control over national bank. And all other guys who come to Zelensky and say, let's print money, let's give credits for zero, let's do it.
Petrashko does.
Yes, like Petrashko, because he represents Bakhmatyuk interest against another very dodgy oligarch who take a lot of money from foreign investors. Because it's funny, because the biggest problem for Ukraine is Kolomoisky, who take money from domestic guys, mostly, yes, and slightly from external. But Bakhmatyuk, he take more than $2 billion from international investors and slightly from locals through his two banks. So yes, and these guys are trying to implement style of behavior that we have before Maidan. Let's print money, let's give loans to whatever they want, and it's good for the economy. And the problem is that President shares such view. NABU, this independent anti-corruption institution that was implemented like a part of IMF cooperation with Ukraine 4 or 5 years ago, and now they really have a huge difference without any Ukrainian institution, special forces institution that are very corrupt. NABU is much better. They do not always provide a high quality of knowledge, yes, but we fully agree with that they share values. And NABU is investigated private bank case again. Yeah, that's why head of NABU is under attack from Kolomoisky guys and from Avakov private bank case. Again, private bank case, Bakhmatyuk case. So big oligarchs under investigation is unbelievable for Ukraine, and that's why people are attacking NABU.
Do these oligarchs act separately?
You see, it's again, we were caught about Sarashata, all these guys who share same values. So you do not have to have union to do in one way, because you think in one way. The same with oligarchs. So yes, they support each other because they have same values, but now they have common enemy, West world. This Western world who try to push Ukraine to civilization. So these guys are afraid of it, that's why they attacked reforms.
So previously we were talking about people like Economy Minister Petrashko, who says that the best way to go out of a crisis is to print money, for example. There are other people with that same insane ideas like, why shouldn't we declare a default? They set an example of Argentina, and what can you say to these people?
Again, people who declare it, who provided such narrative, they're working for oligarchs, for Russians, because both of them, Kolomoisky and Russians, need Ukraine to default, because default means no connection with West world. So that's the idea. They do not talk about that, it's going to be heaven after default. And everybody knows that there is no economic heaven after default. Yes, it's always it hurts. Yes, and we can see examples Argentina now, and before we see Lebanon now is under default, and you can see what happens on their streets.
By the way, about Argentina, we have many Facebook followers from Argentina. So, dear guests, please tell us in the comments below about how your lives have changed after the 8th and the 9th default, about the social payments, about the prices and all this stuff. That would be really very interesting to read. And
yeah, because for the last 30 years, Argentina has already 3 defaults. So people have a lot of experience of defaulting, how to default it.
So could you please share your experience? Because who knows? Why do we need it? But let's be prepared, just in case.
I'm Guillemí, a journalist from Diario La Nación newspaper in Argentina. I think that if you make in Argentina or in any other Latin American country a list of most hated international institutions, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, will rank very high on the list and will probably be the winner. In Buenos Aires, you can find IMF initials, FMI in Spanish, in graffitis all around the city. It is also handwritten in popular restaurant toilets, and even the phrase "out IMF, fuera FMI" is a very well-known slogan again and again in any political campaign. But even if voters hate or at least fear IMF, Argentinian governments have been asking IMF help for more than a dozen times since the country joined the organizations in 1956. And the last $57,000 billion agreement 2 years ago was the biggest loan package ever in IMF history. So, how is this dichotomy? Do we hate or do we love IMF? No doubt, without IMF help, Argentina would have defaulted on all its debt in 2018. So this agreement was indeed very good to keep paying our creditors and keeping open the doors for Argentina to international markets. But IMF programs have never worked to help the country grow, create jobs, or reduce poverty or inequality. Going to the IMF is seen as something humiliating for Argentinians, and we can also say that giving money to Argentina is like giving money to a compulsive spender. But again, who should stop this vicious circle, the borrower or the receiver? That's a question Argentinians have been asking for generations, and we still don't know the answer.
So I believe that such a complicated topic as the IMF and the Ukrainian cooperation with the IMF is too broad to cover all the issues arising around it in such a short time. But our interview is slowly coming to the end, and I would like to say our audience once again that today we hosted a great guest, Serhii Fursa, investment banker, not an analyst. Not an analyst from Dragon Capital, but a columnist and a financial expert. So, and now we have to say that Kyiv, not Kyiv, is kind of super project, and you all
Kyiv,
should
not Kyiv, it's super project. I think we really need this project because true because people in Ukraine used to live in a world when it's Ukrainian centric. It's a big problem because you don't know what happens abroad, and people who live abroad doesn't have a clue what is Ukraine is. So you need to show that yes, we are living somewhere close to Russia, but we could be civilized, and we could speak English. We have good restaurants, we have good nature, and we're ready to be part of this golden billions. We want to be a part of civilized world, and so I think you do a great job to show people that Ukraine is not only for drinking cheap alcohol and having other cheap fun.
Good job. We didn't rehearse that.
Actually, I have a last probably question for you. If you were a chairman of the board of the IMF, Would you vote for a loan to Ukraine, or would you take some time to think? And before you answer, I would like you to remind you that you've started negotiations with one government and proceeded with another. The president of Ukraine is still very much connected and linked to oligarch Kolomoisky. National Bank is still threatened, under threat of challenging its independence. So what would be your answer?
Look, I'm head of IMF, and I am deal with only such countries with such problems. Because if it's good, proper country without such a problems, you named it, doesn't need IMF. But you need IMF if you do all this dodgy stuff. So yes, I would sign a deal with Ukraine, but I would ask my staff to be tough. In a very, very unbelievable way, I could take my money back just in 1 second. So just to recommend, do not play with me, yes, and be tough.
You better not mess with Serhii Fursa.
As head of IMF.
As a future head of...
Yeah, and a bonus question. How to spell the capital of Ukraine correctly?
Kyiv.
Perfect. That's Kyiv, not Kiev. These were Polina Boychuk, Tatiana Haiduk, and our very special guest, Serhii Fursa. Thank you very much for your coming. We do value you.
It was a pleasure.
See you next time. From Ukraine with love.
That's what we usually do. I'm sorry, I forgot. So, okay, people, so stay safe, stay kind, and remember the most important thing. Kyiv, not Kiev.
From Ukraine with love. And we will not forget to put a link of Serhii Fursa's Facebook account so you could follow the news from Ukraine from a real expert.
As we do.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
That's it.
Все.
Ура! Дякую.
Рівно 15 до 10. Фоткаємося.
Да, де Вова? Молодець, слухай, я знов забула.